They say blood is thicker than water. But sometimes, the hand that offers you water when you are dying of thirst belongs to a stranger, while your own blood is busy writing your eulogy. In the grand, silent halls of the Davenport mansion, this saying was a quiet poison, seeping into the very foundations of the family. The air in the formal dining room was as cold as the marble floors beneath their feet, a chill that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. Amelia sat perfectly still, a ghost at the feast, her presence merely tolerated. Across the long, polished mahogany table, her mother-in-law, Eleanor Davenport, watched her with eyes that held the sharp, unforgiving glint of shattered glass. Every word from Eleanor was a carefully aimed dart, dipped in condescension. "Amelia, darling," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness, "you must try the consommé. It's a family recipe, though I suppose it might be a bit complex for your palate." Amelia simply nodded, a faint, polite smile fixed on her face, a mask she had learned to wear every single day. Her husband, James, sat beside her, a handsome statue, his silence a betrayal far louder than his mother's insults. He offered no defense, no comforting glance, nothing. He was a willing spectator to her slow, daily humiliation. The tension was a living thing in the room, thick and suffocating. It coiled around the crystal glasses and silver cutlery, making every bite of food taste like ash. And then, it happened. In the middle of a sentence about the declining standards of modern society, Eleanor stopped. A fork clattered from her hand, the sound echoing unnaturally in the sudden silence. Her perfectly painted lips parted in a soft gasp, her face draining of all color, turning into a waxen, terrifying white. She clutched her chest, her eyes wide with a silent, primal fear. Before anyone could react, she slumped sideways in her chair and slid to the floor in a heap of expensive silk. Chaos erupted. A maid shrieked. James shot up from his chair, his face a mask of panic, fumbling for his phone, shouting "Call 911" into the air. But through the noise and the panic, one person moved with an eerie, focused calm. Amelia. The woman they all dismissed, the one they treated as invisible. She was on her knees in an instant, her fingers pressing against Eleanor's neck, searching for a pulse that wasn't there. And as her husband stared, frozen in useless terror, Amelia tilted Eleanor's head back, took a deep breath, and began chest compressions. Her movements were steady, rhythmic, and detached. There was no love in her touch, no fear in her eyes, only a cold, chilling resolve. In that moment, she was not saving her mother-in-law. She was not saving the woman who had tried to break her spirit. She was simply keeping a heart beating, postponing a fate that, just moments before, she might have welcomed. The battle for Eleanor's life had begun, but the war for everything else was just about to find its opening shot. Before the cold marble halls and the silent, suffocating dinners, there was a life filled with the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. Amelia grew up in a world painted in shades of green, a world where value was measured not in stock portfolios, but in the patience it took to nurture a seed into a towering tree. Her father was a professor of botany, her mother a librarian, and their home was rich in knowledge and warmth, if not in monetary wealth. Amelia inherited their quiet passion, channeling it into landscape architecture. She didn't just design gardens, she created living sanctuaries, understanding the delicate balance of light, water, and soil required for life to flourish. She was talented, respected in her field, and saw the world as a place of potential beauty. It was this passion that had drawn James Davenport to her. He had been a client, overseeing the development of a new corporate campus, and he was captivated by her. She spoke of ecosystems and sustainability with a fire in her eyes that he had never seen in the debutantes and heiresses of his circle, women who spoke only of acquisitions and social seasons. To James, Amelia was authentic, a breath of fresh air in his gilded, sterile world. Their courtship was a whirlwind romance, a storybook tale where the prince chose the talented commoner over the pedigreed princesses. Amelia fell deeply in love, blinded by his charm and the promise of a shared future. She believed his love was a shield, strong enough to protect her from any storm. She was tragically mistaken. She hadn't realized that James Davenport was not the king in this story. but merely the prince, and a prince is always subject to the will of the reigning monarch. And the queen, Eleanor Davenport, ruled her kingdom with an iron fist clad in a velvet glove. From the very beginning, Eleanor saw Amelia not as a daughter-in-law, but as a corporate takeover by an inferior competitor. She was a flaw in the family's carefully curated brand. The first battle was the wedding. Amelia had dreamed of a small, intimate ceremony in a botanical garden. Eleanor, however, announced to the press that the wedding would be the social event of the year, held at the Davenport's Country Club, with a guest list of 500 people Amelia had never met. Every choice Amelia made, from the type of flower to the flavor of the cake, was met with a dismissive little smile and the phrase, "That's a sweet idea, dear, but it's simply not how we do things." James, caught in the middle, would always placate Amelia with empty promises. "Just let her have this one thing, darling. It means so much to her." But it was never just one thing. It was everything. After the wedding, the gift of living in the guest wing of the main Davenport estate was presented as an act of generosity. In reality, it was a strategic move to keep Amelia under constant surveillance. Her home was not her own. The staff reported to Eleanor. Her comings and goings were noted. Her attempts to create a small private garden in her own space were criticized by Eleanor's award-winning horticulturalist as amateurish. The early days of her marriage were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Eleanor never raised her voice. Her cruelty was far more sophisticated than that. It came in the form of carefully worded compliments that felt like insults. At a charity gala, she would touch Amelia's arm and say to a friend, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Isn't she lovely? So wonderfully unspoiled by luxury." She would give Amelia gifts, like a subscription to an etiquette magazine or a book on the history of the great families of America, with the unspoken message that Amelia was a project to be fixed, a rough stone that needed polishing. When Amelia tried to connect, to find some common ground, her efforts were systematically dismantled. Knowing Amelia's profession, Eleanor once asked for her opinion on redesigning a section of the estate's vast gardens. Amelia poured her heart into the project, spending weeks on detailed plans, hoping this could be the breakthrough she longed for. She presented her ideas with nervous excitement. Eleanor looked them over with a blank expression, then slid them back across the table. "Thank you for the effort, Amelia. It's clear you've worked very hard. But I've decided to have Francois from Paris handle it. His family has been designing gardens for European royalty for centuries. You understand." The dismissal was absolute. It wasn't just about a garden. It was a declaration that Amelia's skills, her identity, her very essence, were worthless in this world. The deepest cuts, however, came from James's complicity. When Amelia would finally break down in the privacy of their bedroom, her voice trembling as she recounted the day's subtle tortures, he would sigh with practiced weariness. "You're reading too much into it," he'd say, his back to her, as he loosened his tie. "Mother is from a different generation. She doesn't mean anything by it." He would accuse her of being too sensitive, of being paranoid, of not trying hard enough to fit in. He was gaslighting her, making her question her own sanity, forcing her to swallow her pain in isolation. He chose his mother's comfort over his wife's well-being every single time. And so Amelia learned to be silent. She learned to smile when she wanted to scream. She learned to retreat into herself, building walls around her heart to protect it from the constant, abrasive friction of her new family. She became a beautiful, tragic figure, wandering through the perfect, lifeless rooms of the Davenport mansion, a living ghost in her own life. Her love for James was a dying ember, clinging to the memory of the man she thought she had married, while the reality of the weak, spineless man beside her grew colder with each passing day. The foundation of her personal hell had been laid, stone by cold, heavy stone, and she was trapped inside, waiting for a crack in the walls that would either set her free or bury her completely. The first year of marriage bled into the second, and the subtle chill in the Davenport mansion deepened into a permanent, biting frost. The psychological cuts from Eleanor had left Amelia scarred, but she had learned to shield herself, to exist in a state of quiet endurance. The real erosion, the one that threatened to bring the entire structure of her life crashing down, began with James. It started, as it so often does, with time. Time that was unaccounted for. The late nights at the office became more frequent, stretching past midnight, then bleeding into the early hours of the morning. At first, the excuses were plausible board meetings, international calls, urgent deadlines. But soon they became flimsy, vague. He would return home smelling not of stale office air, but of expensive wine and a faint, floral perfume that wasn't hers. He, who had once tossed his phone onto the bedside table without a care, now guarded it like a state secret. It was always in his pocket, or placed screen down, a silent, dark sentinel between them. Calls were taken with a quick glance at her before he stepped into the hallway, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur. The physical distance was a chasm that grew wider each day. A casual touch on his arm would cause him to flinch. He would turn his back to her in bed, creating a wall of silence and indifference. The man she had fallen in love with, the charming, attentive man who had seen the fire in her soul, was gone. In his place was a hollow-eyed stranger, a polite roommate who shared her address but not her life. Amelia felt herself drifting, unmoored, in the vast, empty sea of their marriage. She wanted to believe the excuses, to trust her husband, but the evidence of her own senses was a persistent, nagging tide, pulling her toward a truth she was terrified to face. The first crack in her denial appeared on a Tuesday evening. James was in the shower, and his phone, left for a rare moment on the dresser, lit up. Amelia's eyes were drawn to it against her will. A single message glowed on the screen, a beacon in the dim light of the bedroom. It wasn't the words themselves that were damning, but the casual intimacy they implied. Still smiling from last night, you are trouble. See. The letter hung in the air, a sharp, accusatory point. It wasn't Charles, the business associate. It wasn't Colin, the cousin. The tone was not professional, not familial. It was personal, dangerous. When James came out of the bathroom, a towel around his waist, Amelia was standing there, her heart hammering against her ribs. She kept her voice steady, a feat of incredible self-control. "James, who is C?" He froze, his eyes darting from her face to the phone on the dresser. For a split second, she saw it pure, unadulterated panic. Then, the mask of indignation slammed down. "What are you talking about?" he snapped, his voice instantly aggressive. "Have you been going through my phone? After everything I do for us, for this family, you're spying on me?" He strode across the room, grabbed the phone, and turned on her, his voice rising. "It's Charles from the London office, if you must know. We were celebrating a deal. My God, Amelia, your insecurity is going to destroy us." He didn't persuade her. He bludgeoned her with accusations, turning her fear into a weapon against her. She flinched, reeling from the force of his anger. He made her feel small, foolish, and shamefully suspicious. She apologized, the word tasting like poison on her tongue, and he accepted it with a magnanimous sigh, as if he were the injured party. She tried to believe him. For weeks, she told herself she was being paranoid, that Eleanor's constant criticism had finally broken her, making her see shadows where there was only light. But the seed of doubt, once planted, had taken root. She started to notice things she had previously dismissed. A charge on a credit card statement for a jewelry store she had never visited. 2 tickets for a concert he claimed he had attended with a client who, when she met him later, mentioned he had been out of the country that week. Each inconsistency was a small tremor, shaking the fragile ground beneath her feet. In a final, desperate act of hope, she decided to go to the one person who might have an interest in protecting the sanctity of the Davenport name, Eleanor. She thought, foolishly, that a mother would never stand for her son jeopardizing his marriage, his reputation. She found Eleanor in the library, a grand, intimidating room where the walls were lined with books that had likely never been opened, their leather spines serving as wallpaper. Amelia stood before her, feeling like a child called to the principal's office. She began tentatively, framing her worry as concern for James. "Eleanor, I'm worried about James. He seems so stressed, so distant. And I saw a message on his phone. I'm afraid he might be getting himself into a difficult situation." She had hoped for surprise, for concern, perhaps even for a rare moment of female solidarity. What she received was a look of utter, soul-crushing pity. Eleanor placed her bookmark carefully in her novel and looked up, her eyes as cold and gray as a winter sky. "Amelia," she said, her voice calm and surgical. "A successful man, a powerful man like my son, has immense pressures. He requires distractions. It is the duty of a wife to be a peaceful harbor, a place of rest, not another source of interrogation and drama." Amelia stared, speechless. Eleanor continued, her words precise and devastating. "If a man feels the need to seek companionship elsewhere, it is often a reflection of what he is lacking at home. Tell me, dear, when was the last time you truly excited him? When was the last time you were anything more than a predictable, dreary obligation?" The cruelty was breathtaking. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, delivering the final blow. "James is accustomed to a certain standard of woman, a woman who understands his world, who can challenge him, who isn't a fragile little bird that needs constant reassurance. Perhaps if you spent less time worrying about his messages and more time trying to be the wife he actually wants, you wouldn't be in this difficult situation." Amelia left the library with the sound of her own world shattering in her ears. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just James's betrayal. It was a conspiracy of two. The mother and the son, united in their deception, with her as the designated fool. She was utterly and completely alone, trapped in a house of mirrors where every reflection was a distortion of the truth. The cracks were no longer just cracks. They were gaping canyons, and she finally understood that no one was coming to save her. If she was going to survive, she would have to find her own way out of the ruins. The wake-up call from Eleanor did not break Amelia. It forged her. The naive hope that had sustained her through months of torment shattered, and in its place, a cold, hard clarity began to set in. She stopped crying. She stopped pleading with a husband who had become a stranger. She stopped trying to win the approval of a mother-in-law who was her sworn enemy. Instead, she began to watch. Her grief, so raw and consuming, was packed away, replaced by a quiet, methodical vigilance. She became the perfect wife on the surface, placid, agreeable, and distant. She no longer questioned James about his late nights. She simply greeted him with a hollow smile when he came home and said nothing when he left. Her compliance was a camouflage, a strategic retreat. James and Eleanor mistook her silence for submission, for a final, defeated acceptance of her place. They believed they had finally broken her. They had no idea they had just armed her. The truth, she now knew, would not be given to her. It had to be taken. One Thursday, James announced he had another crucial dinner meeting. It was a last-minute arrangement with potential investors from Singapore, he said, his eyes avoiding hers. He dressed with particular care, choosing a custom-tailored suit and a silk tie she'd never seen before. He smelled of expensive cologne and quiet excitement. As he kissed her goodbye, a perfunctory peck on the cheek that felt as cold as a stone, Amelia felt a switch flip inside her. Tonight, the charade would end. With her heart beating a frantic, suffocating rhythm in her chest, she waited 10 minutes after he left and then walked to the garage. She chose her own modest car, a vehicle Eleanor despised as unbecoming, and slipped out into the night. Following him was terrifying. She stayed several cars behind, her hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel, her mind racing with 1,000 dreadful possibilities. What if he saw her? What if this was all in her head, and he really was at a business meeting? The shame of that possibility was almost as frightening as the alternative. But James did not drive toward the financial district. He bypassed the gleaming office towers and headed for a quiet, tree-lined street in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. He pulled up to a restaurant she recognized from magazines, a place renowned for its discreet atmosphere and a waiting list that was months long. A place for romantic assignations, not investor meetings. Amelia parked across the street, her car hidden in the shadows of a large oak tree, and she watched. The engine was off, the only sound, the frantic drumming of her own blood in her ears. James got out of his car, smoothed his suit, and looked toward the restaurant entrance with a smile she hadn't seen directed at her in years. It was a smile of genuine, unbridled happiness. And then the restaurant doors opened and a woman emerged, bathed in the warm, golden light. She was tall, elegant, dressed in a shade of red that radiated confidence. Even from a distance, Amelia could see she was beautiful. As the woman walked toward James, Amelia's blood ran cold. She recognized her from the society pages and from old photo albums in the Davenport Library. It was Clara Beaumont, heiress to a shipping fortune, a childhood friend of James, the woman Eleanor had once referred to as the daughter I always wished for. Clara greeted James not with a handshake, but with an intimate touch to his chest and a laugh that carried across the quiet street. He wrapped his arm around her waist, and they walked inside together, their bodies perfectly in sync, a portrait of effortless intimacy. Amelia sat in the darkness, unable to move, unable to breathe. She watched them through the large front window as they were seated at a secluded corner table. She saw the way he leaned in to listen to her, the way he refilled her wine glass, the way they both laughed, their heads thrown back in shared joy. This was not a new fling. This was a deep, comfortable, long-standing connection. This was a whole other life he was living, a life where she had no part. She might have sat there for hours, frozen in her misery, had it not been for the arrival of the second car. A sleek, black town car with the Davenport crest discreetly on the door pulled up to the curb. Eleanor's driver opened the rear door, and Eleanor herself stepped out. She didn't march in to confront her son. She didn't look shocked or displeased. Instead, a serene smile graced her lips. She entered the restaurant, and a moment later, Amelia saw her arrive at their table. She saw her son and Clara stand to greet her. She saw Eleanor kiss Clara's cheek with the warmth and affection of a mother. She saw the three of them sit down together, a perfect, happy, triumphant family. The truth hit Amelia with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a betrayal. This was a succession plan. They weren't hiding an affair from Eleanor. Eleanor was hosting it. They weren't just cheating on Amelia. They were actively replacing her. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and numb disbelief. The next morning, as if orchestrated by a master puppeteer, the second act of the assault began. She received a call from Mr. Abernathy, the family's ancient and implacable lawyer. He requested her presence at his office, speaking in a dry, dispassionate tone about some routine estate planning. In his mahogany-paneled office, surrounded by generations of Davenport legal history, he presented her with a thick document bound in blue leather. A post-nuptial agreement, he explained, his voice devoid of any emotion. James and his mother feel it is a prudent step to protect the family's legacy assets. He used words like prudence and legacy, but Amelia heard only the words he wasn't saying: dismissal, erasure, dispossession. She scanned the pages. In dense legal jargon, the document stipulated that she would renounce all claims to any and all Davenport assets, including any wealth generated during their marriage. In the event of a divorce, she would be given a one-time payment, so meager it was a calculated insult, barely enough to cover a year's rent on a modest apartment. It even included a non-disclosure clause that would legally gag her from ever speaking about her life with the Davenports. They were offering to buy her silence and her history for pennies on the dollar. It's just a formality, Mr. Abernathy droned on. A simple measure to ensure there are no complications in the future. That evening, James broached the subject with feigned casualness. Abernathy called you, right? It's just a piece of paper, honey. Sign it, and it will show Mother that you truly love me, for me, not for my name. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying precision. The public humiliation, the affair, the emotional abuse, it was all designed to break her down, to make her feel so worthless that when they presented her with this final, insulting offer, she would take it and vanish without a fight. She looked at her husband, this man who was a stranger to her, and she felt nothing. The love was gone. The hurt was gone. All that remained was a vast, cold emptiness. She held the document in her hands, its weight feeling heavier than paper. It was the blueprint of her own destruction. She looked at James and gave him a small, weary smile. "Of course," she said, her voice soft and steady. "Let me just take some time to read it through." He was relieved by her apparent compliance. He didn't see the ice forming in her eyes. He didn't understand that he had not handed her a surrender, he had handed her a declaration of war. The post-nuptial agreement sat in the drawer of Amelia's nightstand, a coiled snake waiting to strike. She didn't sign it. She didn't refuse to sign it. She simply let it lie there, a silent testament to the war that had been declared upon her. She existed in a state of surreal calm, a passenger in her own life, watching the days unfold with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a hostile ecosystem. She played her part flawlessly. She was the quiet, subdued wife, her spirit seemingly crushed. This placid exterior lulled James and Eleanor into a state of arrogant confidence. They saw her as a problem that was nearly solved, a loose end that would soon be tied. They continued their lives, planning their future, a future that was built upon the ruins of hers, never noticing the new, hard light in her eyes. It was a change that began subtly in Eleanor. The matriarch, a woman who ran her life and her empire with the precision of a military general, began to show signs of faltering. It started with a weariness that even her formidable will could not overcome. Her skin, always impeccably maintained, took on a pale, sallow hue. At dinners, she would push her food around her plate, her appetite gone. She blamed it on stress, on the changing seasons, on anything but a weakness within herself. To admit to illness was to admit to a flaw, and Eleanor Davenport did not have flaws. The storm broke, as they so often do, without warning. It was during a tense meeting in the study with James and the family lawyers, a meeting Amelia was pointedly not invited to, that the facade finally crumbled. A maid, passing by the half-open door, heard a sharp cry, followed by the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor. This time, there was no dramatic dinner scene. There was only the stark, ugly reality of a medical crisis. By the time Amelia was summoned, Eleanor was already on a stretcher, an oxygen mask strapped to her face, her eyes fluttering with fear and confusion. At the sterile, white-walled hospital, under the merciless glare of fluorescent lights, the Davenport family's power meant nothing. Money could buy a private suite, but it could not rewrite a blood test. The diagnosis was delivered by a kind-faced but brutally honest nephrologist. Eleanor's chronic kidney disease, a condition she had managed with diet and medication for over a decade, had cascaded into end-stage renal failure. Her kidneys were shutting down. The doctor's words were clear and unambiguous. Dialysis could keep her alive for a short time, but it was a grueling, temporary measure. Her only chance at a real future, he explained, was a kidney transplant. The word transplant hung in the air, a terrifying alien concept to a family that believed every problem could be solved with wealth and influence. A frantic, desperate search began. James, his face pale with a fear that was equal parts filial concern and raw self-interest, was the first to be tested. His entire future, his inheritance, his carefully planned life with Clara, all depended on his mother's survival. He needed her to live, to sign the papers, to transition the empire smoothly into his hands. He paced the waiting room, barking orders into his phone, treating the medical crisis like a hostile takeover that needed to be quashed. The results came back within a day. Not a match. His blood type was incompatible. For the first time in his life, James Davenport had been told there was something he wanted that he simply could not have. His frustration was volcanic. He railed against the doctors, the nurses, the unfairness of genetics. The net was cast wider. Cousins were called. Distant relatives were tracked down. Each one was a potential solution, a potential source for the organ that could save the queen. And one by one, they were ruled out. Wrong blood type, underlying health issues, unwillingness to undergo major surgery. The vast and powerful Davenport network, for all its social and financial capital, could not produce one compatible kidney. The final, crushing blow came when the doctor explained the national waiting list. The average wait time for her blood type is 3 to 5 years, he said gently. And unfortunately, given the rapid decline in her condition, Mrs. Davenport does not have years. The hospital suite became the family's new battleground. Eleanor, stripped of her Chanel suits and her imperious demeanor, seemed to shrink in the oversized hospital bed. Wires and tubes connected her to a host of beeping, humming machines that were now in command of her life. She was frail, jaundiced, and for the first time, utterly powerless. Her empire could not save her. Her legacy could not breathe for her. She was just a sick woman, terrified of dying. James's panic festered, turning into a sour, impatient anger. He saw his future slipping away, delayed and complicated by this biological inconvenience. Clara would visit, a specter of useless beauty in the grim, medicinal-smelling room. She brought flowers that Eleanor couldn't smell and offered platitudes that sounded hollow and absurd. She was an outsider, a guest at a tragedy, unable to offer anything of substance. And through it all, there was Amelia. She was a quiet, constant presence. While James yelled at hospital administrators, Amelia spoke softly to the nurses, asking about Eleanor's pain levels. While Clara checked her phone in the corner, Amelia would moisten a cloth and dab Eleanor's dry, cracked lips. She moved through the chaos with a strange, unnerving grace. She wasn't playing the part of the dutiful daughter-in-law. There was no warmth in her actions, no forgiveness. It was something else, a profound and detached sense of duty, as if she were tending to a fallen monument. Her calm was a mirror that reflected James's frantic selfishness, and he hated her for it. One evening, after a particularly grim update from the doctors, the room fell into a heavy, hopeless silence. James stood by the window, staring out at the city lights, his back to the room. Eleanor was asleep, her breathing shallow and ragged, aided by the gentle hiss of a machine. All hope was gone. The doctors had started talking about palliative care. The lawyers were discreetly updating the will. It was over. Amelia sat in a chair by the bed, the legal agreement to erase her life, still sitting in her drawer at home. She looked at the woman in the bed, the architect of her misery, now reduced to a fragile, dying creature. The woman who held all the cards was now left with none. And in that moment of absolute despair, an idea began to form in Amelia's mind. It was a wild, audacious, terrifying thought, an idea so powerful it could change everything. A faint glimmer of hope had appeared in the darkest hour of the Davenport family. But the hope was not for them. It was a strategic opening, a checkmate move on a board they didn't even know they were playing on. The woman they had deemed worthless might be the only person in the world who possessed the one thing their billions could not buy. She held the key, and she was about to decide whether to use it to open a door or to lock it forever. The idea took root in the sterile silence of the hospital room, a wild and improbable seed planted in the barren soil of Amelia's despair. It was born not of compassion, but of a breathtaking, almost cruel sense of irony. She, Amelia, the unwanted, the insignificant, the woman they were actively trying to erase, might be the only person on earth who could save them. She knew her blood type was O negative. Her mother, a librarian who believed in practicalities, had made sure she knew it from a young age. The universal donor, a person whose blood could be given to anyone. It was a fact that had been dormant in her mind for years, but now it surfaced with the force of a revelation. Could it be that simple? Could the key to this entire, impossible situation be flowing through her own veins? She dismissed the thought at first. It was madness. Why would she even consider it? The rational part of her brain, the part that was now cold and sharp and clear, screamed against it. She replayed the litany of their sins in her mind. Eleanor's daily psychological torture, the calculated cruelty, the smug satisfaction she took in Amelia's pain. And James, the casual betrayal, the affair with Clara that was not a moment of weakness, but a long-term strategy. The cold, corporate way they had tried to strip her of her dignity and her future with that monstrous legal document. Letting Eleanor die felt like justice. It was karma, delivered on a silver platter. Her death would solve everything. It would free Amelia from this gilded cage. It would shatter James's world, derailing his perfect life with Clara and plunging his inheritance into chaos. It would be a clean, passive revenge. She would not have to lift a finger. She would only have to do nothing. And who could blame her? No one even knew she was a potential match. No one would ever have to know. She could walk away, and their dynasty could crumble under the weight of its own rotten core. She owed them nothing. The debt was all on their side, a debt of cruelty and deceit that could never be repaid. The idea of sacrificing a part of her own healthy body for the woman who had poisoned her life was grotesque, an obscene act of self-mutilation. And yet, the thought would not leave her. It clung to her, persistent and troubling. One afternoon, she slipped out of the hospital, telling a distracted James she needed some fresh air. But she didn't go to a park. She drove to a small, private clinic across town, a place where no one would know her name. Using Eleanor's date of birth and the medical information she had gleaned from a chart a nurse had carelessly left on a counter, she requested a comprehensive compatibility test. As she sat in the waiting room, the war inside her raged. The argument for letting fate run its course was simple and powerful: self-preservation. But the argument for intervening was more complex, a tangled web of morality and strategy. At her core, Amelia was a creator. Her life's work was about fostering growth, about bringing beauty and order from tangled chaos. To stand by and watch a life extinguish when she had the power to save it felt like a violation of her own soul. It wasn't about Eleanor, it was about her. To do nothing would be to let their poison infect her, to become as cold and calculating as they were. But beneath the moral quandary, a harder, more strategic thought was taking shape. What would happen if she saved her? Revenge by inaction was simple, but it was also an ending. What if, instead of ending the game, she changed the rules entirely? By making this ultimate, undeniable sacrifice, she would seize a power that was absolute. Eleanor, the proud matriarch, would owe her life to the gold-digging nobody. She would carry a piece of Amelia inside her for the rest of her days, a living, breathing reminder of her debt. James and his empty promises would be silenced, his betrayal cast in the shadow of her incredible act of grace. The moral high ground would be hers, an unassailable fortress from which she could dictate the terms of her own existence. It was a move of breathtaking audacity. It was not forgiveness. It was a power play of the highest order. She would not be the victim who got her revenge. She would be the savior who earned her justice. A day later, the clinic called. "Mrs. Smith," the doctor said, using the false name she had given. "The results are, well, they're quite extraordinary. You're not just a match for the recipient profile you gave us. You're what we call a perfect match. The genetic markers are an incredibly rare one in 10,000 fit. It's the best possible scenario for a successful transplant." The words hit her with the force of destiny. A perfect match. The universe was not just presenting her with a choice, it was screaming a direction. That evening, she returned to the hospital. The air was thick with the stench of defeat. James was slumped in a chair, his head in his hands, the picture of a broken man. Amelia stood before him, her calm, a stark contrast to his disheveled misery. "I need to talk to you," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through his fog of despair. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and weary. "What is it, Amelia? I can't handle any more problems right now." She took a deep breath. "I went and got tested," she said, her words dropping like stones into the silent room. "I'm a perfect match for your mother." James stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she had said. Disbelief, confusion, then a wild, desperate flicker of hope ignited in his eyes. He shot to his feet. "What? Amelia, are you serious? You would do that?" He reached for her, a torrent of grateful, meaningless words starting to spill from his lips. Amelia held up a hand, stopping him cold. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes like chips of ice. "I didn't say I would do it," she corrected him. "I said I am a match. There is a difference." His face fell. "What? What do you mean? What do you want? Money?" "Anything, Amelia. I'll give you anything." "I don't want your money, James," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "I will agree to the surgery on 2 conditions. First, you end it with Clara. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now. You will call her, and you will tell her it is over. Permanently. Second, that document Mr. Abernathy gave me. I want it burned." I want you to go to his office, retrieve every copy, and burn it in front of me. From this moment on, you will treat me as your wife, and you will show me the respect that position entails. Those are my terms. There is no negotiation. James was trapped. He looked from his wife's unyielding face to the door of his mother's room, where death was patiently waiting. He was a drowning man, and she was offering him the only lifeline. The choice was no choice at all. Yes, he breathed, the word a desperate exhalation. Of course. Anything you want, Amelia. I'll do it. I'll do it all. He would have promised her the world in that moment. Amelia knew his promises were worthless, built on desperation, not conviction. But it didn't matter. She wasn't seeking his love or his loyalty. She was securing his compliance. The deal was struck. The preparations for the surgery began. Amelia felt no sense of victory, only the grim determination of a soldier heading into a battle she knew she had to fight. She was willingly sacrificing a piece of herself, not for them, but for the justice she intended to build with her own 2 hands. The world returned to Amelia in fragments. First, the low, rhythmic beep of a machine, a steady counterpoint to the chaotic symphony of pain in her side. Then, the starchy smell of hospital linens and the cold antiseptic air. She opened her eyes to a blurred, white ceiling, the grogginess of the anesthesia, a thick, heavy blanket over her mind. A nurse bustled in, her face a welcome mask of professional kindness. "Welcome back, Amelia," she said, her voice soft. The surgery was a complete success, a textbook transplant. "Your kidney started working for Mrs. Davenport almost immediately. You did a truly amazing thing." The words barely registered. A success. Amelia closed her eyes, a wave of exhaustion and relief washing over her. She had done it. She had walked through the fire and come out the other side. A deep, dreamless sleep claimed her. Hours later, she drifted back to a state of semi-consciousness. The heavy fog of the drugs had thinned, leaving behind a sharp, searing pain that flared with every breath. She was weak, pinned to the bed by a web of tubes and her own physical fragility, but her mind was becoming clear. The hospital had settled into its nighttime rhythm, a hushed quiet broken only by the distant roll of a cart or a soft page over the intercom. The door to her room was slightly ajar, a sliver of the dimly lit hallway visible. It was in this state of helpless lucidity that she first heard their voices, low and conspiratorial, from just outside her door. It was James, and with him, a woman whose voice, a smooth, confident purr, sent a jolt of ice through Amelia's veins. Clara, he had lied. The promise he made, the cornerstone of their transactional sacrifice, had been broken before Amelia's surgical wound had even begun to close. She lay perfectly still, her breathing shallow, every nerve ending screaming as she strained to hear. "I just don't understand why you let it get this far, Jimmy," Clara said, her voice laced with an impatient, petulant whine. Her just signing the papers and leaving was supposed to be the plan. This is so much messier. What was I supposed to do?" James hissed back, his voice a low, angry whisper. "Let my mother die? Can you imagine the financial mess? The probate? The challenges to the will? This was the only way to stabilize things. I had to say yes. I had to promise her whatever she wanted." Amelia's heart, already bruised and battered, seemed to stop. She felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't about saving his mother's life out of love. It was about protecting his inheritance. It was a business decision. Then came Clara's next words, dripping with a venom that was far more toxic than any poison. "Well, congratulations. Your problem is now a saint." She saved the queen. The selfless, heroic Amelia. How are we ever going to get rid of her now? She has your mother, the board, the entire family, eating out of the palm of her hand. This little sacrifice of hers has completely ruined our timeline. A long silence followed, and in that silence, Amelia's entire world was unmade. The last, microscopic ember of hope, the foolish, secret wish that this grand gesture might awaken some remnant of the man she had once loved, was extinguished, crushed into cold, dead ash. Then James spoke again, and his words were the shovels of dirt on the grave of her heart. "It's a temporary setback, that's all," he said, his voice a chilling mixture of reassurance and contempt. "Give it 6 months. The novelty will wear off. The sympathy will fade. Once Mother is back on her feet, we'll start to lay the groundwork. We'll say the surgery has made Amelia emotionally unstable, that she's become demanding, using her donation as a weapon to control us. It won't be hard. Eleanor will believe whatever I tell her. Her gratitude has a very short shelf life." He paused, and his next words were delivered in a whisper, so cold, so monstrous, it barely seemed human. "Honestly, I was so close. If she hadn't been a match, if Mother had just passed away, everything would be so much simpler right now. You and I could be on a plane to Monaco, and all of this would be over." Amelia didn't make a sound. She couldn't. A scream was trapped in her throat, a ball of pure, silent agony. He had wished his own mother dead. He had stood by her bedside, holding her hand, while secretly hoping she would die to make his life with his mistress easier. The man she had married was not just weak or unfaithful. He was a monster, a hollow shell of a person, filled with nothing but greed and rot. The searing pain in her side was a dull, distant ache compared to the cataclysmic implosion of her soul. Love didn't die a peaceful death. It was murdered, stabbed in the back in a dim hospital corridor. And in the black, silent void where her love for James used to be, something new and terrible was born. It was not hatred. It was colder than that. It was a purpose, forged in the fires of absolute betrayal. It was a resolve as hard and as clear as a diamond. An hour later, James pushed the door open and came into her room, his face arranged in a mask of loving concern. "Hey," he whispered, approaching the bed. "The nurses said you were resting. How are you feeling?" Amelia turned her head on the pillow and looked at him. She summoned a weak, tired smile. Her acting for the first time was better than his. "Sore," she whispered back, her voice raspy. "But I'm okay. I'm just so glad it worked. I'm so happy your mother is going to be all right." He took her hand, his touch now feeling like the crawl of a spider on her skin. "You were so brave, Amelia. So incredibly brave. I'll never forget what you did for us. For me." She squeezed his hand faintly. "We're a family," she said, the words a perfect lie. "We have to take care of each other." He smiled, relieved by her placid acceptance. He saw his sainted, foolish, controllable wife. He did not see the truth. He did not see the woman lying in that bed, stripped of a vital organ, her heart turned to stone, who was, at that very moment, silently vowing to dismantle his entire world. The physical pain would eventually fade, but the purpose she found in that dark hospital room would become the core of her new existence. The sacrifice was real, a part of her was gone forever. But what she had gained was a singular, chilling focus. They thought her kidney had bought her a little more time in their world. She knew it had just started the countdown to the end of theirs. The return to the Davenport mansion was a carefully orchestrated piece of theater. James played the part of the devoted husband, fussing over Amelia's comfort, ensuring her recovery was his top priority. Eleanor, frail but resolute, played the part of the grateful survivor, offering quiet, measured thanks for the gift of life she had been given. And Amelia, in the most demanding role of her life, played the saint. She was beatific. Her smiles were gentle, her voice was soft, and she moved through the grand, cold rooms with a new, ethereal fragility that everyone attributed to her surgery. She never complained of the persistent, deep ache in her side. She never spoke a word of anger or resentment. When James showered her with insincere affection, she accepted it with a quiet grace. When Eleanor offered a stilted compliment, Amelia received it with humble gratitude. Her performance was flawless. And because it was exactly what they wanted to see, a woman softened and subdued by her own sacrifice, they believed it completely. They mistook her silence for forgiveness and her stillness for weakness. They relaxed their guard, believing the danger had passed. They had no idea that her fragility was a costume, and behind the serene mask, a mind as sharp and cold as a surgeon's scalpel was meticulously planning their ruin. The first step was taken in the dead of night, 2 weeks after she came home. While the mansion slept, Amelia, cloaked in darkness, sat in her private bathroom, the only room without a camera, and used a burner phone she had purchased with cash. She didn't look for help in the places her husband would expect. She found a name, a discreet referral from an online forum for women in abusive, high-net-worth marriages. The name was Evelyn Reed, a private investigator. They met in a noisy coffee shop, miles from the affluent suburbs the Davenports called home. Evelyn was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened to Amelia's story without interruption, her expression unreadable. When Amelia was finished, Evelyn simply nodded. "He's a classic case," she said, her voice dry. "Arrogant, careless, and thinks his money makes him invisible. They're the easiest to catch." The second hire was more difficult, more dangerous. She needed someone who could navigate the treacherous waters of corporate finance, a shark who could hunt other sharks. Through Evelyn, she found him, a forensic accountant named Marcus Thorne, a man who had made his name by dismantling the empires of white-collar criminals. He was expensive, and he worked in the shadows. To pay their retainers, Amelia sold a pair of diamond earrings her grandmother had left her, a piece of her past life she had managed to keep separate from the Davenport fortune. The transaction was done through a private jeweler, paid in cash. The silent war had been funded. Amelia now had a secret team, her own private army, and she was the general, directing the battle from deep within enemy territory. Her recovery became her greatest weapon. James and Eleanor expected her to spend her days resting, reading, and slowly recuperating. This provided her the perfect cover. While James was at the office, orchestrating his next betrayal, Amelia was in his study. Her hands, shaking slightly, photographed documents on his desk with her burner phone. She carefully noted the names of shell corporations mentioned in passing phone calls. She found a notebook with passwords carelessly jotted down. She was a ghost, moving through her own house, collecting the fragments of her husband's secret life. She became an expert in his routines, his moods, his lies. Evelyn's reports began to trickle in, each one a fresh stab of validation. There were photographs of James and Clara lunching at secluded restaurants, their hands intertwined. There were hotel receipts, flight manifests for private jets to the Caribbean. Evelyn even managed to plant a listening device in the car James used for his liaisons, and the transcripts were sickening. They spoke of Amelia with a mixture of pity and contempt, calling her the martyr and laughing about her naivete. They discussed their future, the homes they would buy, the children they would have, all with the fortune James was planning to steal. Amelia read these reports with a calm, almost detached focus. The pain was still there, a cold, hard knot in her chest, but it no longer had the power to break her. It was fuel. While Evelyn gathered proof of the moral rot, Marcus Thorne began to dissect the financial cancer. Working with the leads Amelia provided, he burrowed deep into the Davenport Corporation's labyrinthine finances. The picture that emerged was far darker than Amelia had ever imagined. James wasn't just cheating on her, he was systematically bleeding his own family's company dry. Marcus uncovered a complex network of shell corporations, registered in offshore tax havens. He found massively inflated invoices from vendors who, it turned out, were owned by Clara's father. Millions of dollars were being siphoned from legitimate Davenport construction projects and funneled into high-risk, speculative real estate ventures that James and the Beaumont family secretly controlled. He was building a new empire on a foundation of stolen money. He was betraying not only his wife, but the mother who had given him everything, the woman whose life Amelia had just saved. The scale of the fraud was breathtaking. It was reckless, arrogant, and so extensive that it threatened the long-term stability of the entire Davenport enterprise. This changed everything. This was no longer a simple matter of infidelity or a lopsided divorce. This was grand larceny. This was a conspiracy that could lead to criminal indictments and prison sentences. In the quiet of the night, Amelia would spread the evidence across her bed. The glossy photos of her husband and his mistress. The cold, hard numbers on the bank statements. The intricate charts Marcus had drawn, tracing the flow of stolen money through a global network of deceit. She looked at the comprehensive portrait of her husband's treachery, and she felt a grim, resolute satisfaction. She had the weapon. It was bigger, sharper, and more devastating than she could have ever dreamed. Her outward demeanor never wavered. She brought Eleanor her afternoon tea, listening patiently to her complaints about the slow pace of her own recovery. She smiled at James when he came home, asking about his hard day at the office. She played the part of the gentle, fragile saint, all the while holding a dossier that could utterly annihilate them both. She was no longer just a wronged wife seeking justice. She was the protector of a legacy her husband was trying to burn to the ground. Her plan was forming, crystallizing into a single, perfect moment. All she had to do now was wait for the perfect stage. Recovery, for a woman like Eleanor Davenport, was a form of imprisonment. Stripped of her authority, her schedule, and the formidable armor of her corporate life, she was left with nothing but time and her own thoughts. In the long, silent hours of the night, when the rest of the mansion was still, she would lie awake, acutely aware of the new, foreign presence within her. It was Amelia's kidney. A piece of the woman she had systematically tried to break was now the very engine of her own survival. Every steady beat of her pulse was a testament to a sacrifice she could not comprehend, a debt she could never repay. This biological reality began a slow, seismic shift in her perception. The world, which had always been a rigid hierarchy with herself at the apex, suddenly seemed fluid, its truths distorted. Freed from the daily business of running an empire, she became an observer. For the first time, she truly watched her son. She saw him not as the golden heir, the extension of her own legacy, but as a man. And she was not impressed. She saw the way his eyes, clouded with greed and impatience, would glaze over when she spoke of her physical discomfort, only to sharpen with keen interest when the conversation turned to company assets or stock performance. His concern for her was a thin, brittle veneer over a deep well of self-interest. She watched him interact with Amelia. He would perform grand, theatrical gestures of gratitude in front of her, but in quieter moments, she caught the looks of irritation, the dismissive sighs, the cold contempt that he thought no one else could see. He was a terrible actor, and Eleanor, who had negotiated with the most ruthless titans of industry, could suddenly see every false note in his performance. She also began to truly see Amelia. She saw the quiet dignity, the unyielding grace with which Amelia tended to her needs. The care was real, but the warmth was gone. There was a new, formidable stillness in Amelia, a self-possession that reminded Eleanor, uncomfortably, of herself. She saw the profound, bottomless sorrow in Amelia's eyes, and for the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge its source, her own son. Eleanor's legendary business acumen had not been excised with the diseased kidney. It was, in fact, sharper than ever, honed by stillness and suspicion. James had become careless, arrogant in his belief that his mother was a frail invalid and his wife was a defeated saint. He spoke too loudly on phone calls he thought were private. He left documents from his briefcase strewn across his desk. Eleanor started to notice a pattern. The same name kept coming up in his calls: Beaumont Holdings, a new consulting firm he was supposedly working with on an expansion project. But Eleanor knew the Beaumonts. They were in shipping, not consulting. Her mind, a finely tuned machine for detecting deception, began to whir. She decided to act. She made a call to her personal assistant of 30 years, Margaret, a woman whose loyalty to Eleanor was absolute and predated James's rise in the company. "Margaret," Eleanor said, her voice still weak but laced with its old steel. "I need you to do something for me, and it must be kept in the strictest confidence. Pull the full financial workups on the Argent Tower project. I want to see every invoice, every wire transfer, for the last 6 months." When the files arrived, Eleanor spent 2 days poring over them. There it was, a series of enormous, multi-million-dollar payments to Beaumont Holdings for geotechnical consulting. It was a flimsy, almost insulting cover story. James was bleeding her company, his own legacy, and he was doing it in partnership with the family of his mistress. The betrayal was so profound, so audacious, it left her breathless. He wasn't just a cheating husband, he was a thief. He wasn't just hurting Amelia, he was committing treason against the entire Davenport dynasty. And it was in that moment of cold fury that Eleanor realized something else. She remembered a conversation from weeks ago when she had casually mentioned James's new Beaumont venture to Amelia. At the time, she had been testing the waters. Amelia's face had remained a perfect, placid mask, but Eleanor, an expert reader of people, had seen a flicker of knowing in her eyes, a micro-expression of shared, bitter knowledge that lasted less than a second. Amelia already knew. She knew about the affair, and Eleanor suspected she knew about the money too. This quiet, broken girl was not broken at all. She was waiting. A new, unspoken understanding began to form between the two women. It was an alliance forged, not in words, but in shared betrayal. Eleanor decided to send a signal, a single, deniable gesture. One afternoon, she asked Amelia to fetch a book for her from the sitting room. On the antique table next to her reading chair, Eleanor had accidentally left a single sheet of paper, face up. It was a printout of a bank statement from an obscure offshore account showing a recent wire transfer of $5 million from Beaumont Holdings. It was a piece of the puzzle she was certain Amelia didn't have. When Amelia entered the room, Eleanor was staring out the window, her back to the table. Amelia saw the document instantly. Her steps did not falter. She walked to the bookshelf, retrieved the novel, and on her way out, she paused by the table as if to straighten a stack of magazines. Her hand, holding her phone, hovered over the document for a single, silent second. A soft click, audible only to her. Then she left, leaving the paper exactly where it lay. That evening, as Amelia helped her settle in for the night, Eleanor looked at her directly. "Was everything in order in the sitting room today, my dear?" she asked, her voice neutral. Amelia met her gaze, her expression serene. "Everything was perfectly in place, Eleanor. Thank you for asking." The message had been sent, and the reply received. "I have the information. Your secret is safe with me. We are on the same side." They never spoke of it again. They didn't need to. From that day on, they were allies. Two queens on a chessboard, one old and one new, who had been forced into opposition by the reckless actions of a foolish prince. Now, they were silently coordinating their strategies, moving their pieces into position for a final, devastating checkmate. James, blinded by his own arrogance, saw only a sick mother and a docile wife. He had no idea that the two most powerful women in his life had just formed a silent, deadly alliance, and the full force of their combined fury was about to be unleashed upon him. The Davenport Foundation's annual charity gala was the glittering centerpiece of the city's social calendar. It was more than just a fundraiser. It was a carefully constructed display of power. A night where the Davenport name was polished to a brilliant shine for all the world to see. Held in the grand ballroom of the city's most historic hotel, it was a sea of designer gowns, vintage champagne, and 1,000 whispered conversations that could make or break fortunes. For years it had been Eleanor's stage. This year it would be Amelia's. The final weeks leading up to the gala were a period of intense, clandestine activity. Amelia, the picture of serene recovery, met with her team in a series of discreet, anonymous locations. In a borrowed office in a downtown skyscraper, Marcus Thorne walked her through the final presentation. He had distilled months of complex financial investigation into a brutally simple, devastatingly clear narrative. There were slides showing the flow of money from Davenport accounts to the Beaumont shell corporations. There were highlighted documents, irrefutable proof of forged signatures and fraudulent invoices. It was a corporate executioner's masterwork, designed to be understood by everyone from a seasoned investor to a society gossip columnist. Meanwhile, Evelyn Reed was orchestrating the public relations assault. She discreetly contacted a handful of influential journalists, including a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter known for his tenacity and his discretion. She fed them a single, irresistible breadcrumb. "There's a story at the Davenport Gala," she told them over untraceable phone lines. "Not the one on the program. Be ready." The trap was not just personal, it was public. The final piece was a new lawyer, a shark named Jessica Ramirez, whose reputation for dismantling powerful men in divorce court was legendary. Together, they prepared for the aftermath, drafting the divorce filings, the emergency petitions to freeze assets, and the formal notice to the company's board of directors. Amelia was not just lighting a match. She had already dug a fire break and had the emergency services on standby. While Amelia was assembling her arsenal, James and Clara were planning their coronation. Blinded by arrogance, they saw the gala as their coming-out party. With Eleanor still officially recuperating, James had eagerly stepped up to give the keynote address. He saw it as his moment to finally emerge from his mother's shadow, to present himself as the new, dynamic face of the Davenport Empire. He was also planning a special, heartfelt tribute in his speech, not to his wife, but to his brilliant business partner, Clara Beaumont, who would be seated at his head table. It was a calculated move, a soft launch of their future partnership, both professional and personal. Clara was ecstatic, drunk on the promise of victory. She spent a fortune on a custom-made gown of shimmering gold, a dress designed to announce her arrival. She even made a point to show the design to Amelia under the guise of asking her opinion. "Don't you think it's just perfect for the occasion?" She'd purred, her eyes glinting with triumph. "You should wear something simple, Amelia. In a soft blue, perhaps. It would suit your quiet nature." She saw Amelia as a prop, a pale, saintly backdrop against which her own brilliance would shine. The two women orchestrating the takedown continued their silent, perfect coordination. A week before the event, Eleanor summoned the gala's organizer to her study. She officially delegated the keynote speech to James, citing her own lack of strength. But then she made a small, seemingly insignificant addition to the program. After James speaks, she instructed, her voice frail but firm, "I would like to allow Amelia a few minutes to say a special thank you to our donors. Her recent experience has given her a unique perspective on the importance of generosity. Let's add it to the schedule." James, when he was told, merely shrugged. It was a sentimental, harmless gesture. Let the martyr have her moment. It would only make the family look better. He had no idea his mother had just handed Amelia the knife and pointed to his back. The night before the gala, as Amelia was dressing for a pre-event dinner, Eleanor came to her room. She moved slowly, but her eyes were bright and clear. In her hands, she held a heavy, velvet box. She opened it. Lying on a bed of satin was a breathtaking diamond and sapphire necklace, a legendary piece known as the Davenport Star. It was the piece Eleanor wore to every major event, a symbol of the matriarch's power. "I find I no longer have the occasion to wear this," Eleanor said, her voice even. "I believe it would suit you tonight. It was not a gift. It was a transfer of power. It was a crown." Amelia allowed Eleanor to fasten the heavy, cold diamonds around her neck. They looked at each other in the mirror, two soldiers before the final battle. No other words were needed. The evening of the gala arrived. The ballroom was a symphony of light and sound. Amelia stood beside James, the perfect, smiling wife, the Davenport Star cool against her skin. She watched him preen, accepting compliments, shaking hands, utterly oblivious. She saw Clara across the room, a golden statue holding court, basking in a victory she had not yet won. She saw Evelyn Reed, dressed as a wealthy donor, nodding discreetly from the bar. She saw the investigative reporter, looking bored but watchful at a table near the stage. Then she saw Eleanor, seated at the head table, looking regal and calm. As the guests were seated, Eleanor caught Amelia's eye and gave a single, almost imperceptible, nod. The trap was set. The players were in position. The audience was captive. Amelia took a sip of water, her hand steady, her heart a cold, rhythmic drum. The overture was over. The curtain was about to rise. The ballroom was submerged in a warm, golden light, the air humming with the self-satisfied buzz of the city's elite. After a decadent dinner and a parade of smaller speeches, the foundation's chairman took to the podium. With a flourish, he introduced the man of the hour. A leader with vision, with passion, and the heir to a remarkable legacy. Please welcome Mr. James Davenport. The applause was a wave of polite, enthusiastic approval. James rose from the head table, kissing Amelia's cheek with a flourish of performative affection before striding confidently to the stage. He looked magnificent in his custom tuxedo, a picture of charm and inherited power. He launched into his speech, his voice smooth and practiced, weaving a tapestry of comforting words about tradition, innovation, and the solemn duty of philanthropy. He was masterful, and the audience was captivated. Amelia watched him, her hands resting calmly in her lap, the heavy diamonds of the Davenport star cool against her skin. She felt nothing but a profound, chilling emptiness. Halfway through his speech, James paused for dramatic effect. "A vision for the future is nothing without the right partners," he said, his voice dropping to a confidential, earnest tone. He smiled, a brilliant, predatory flash of white. "And I must take a moment to acknowledge a partner whose strategic genius has been absolutely essential in positioning Davenport Industries for the next generation." He gestured toward his table. "Please, join me in thanking the brilliant CEO of Beaumont Holdings, a true visionary, Miss Clara Beaumont." A spotlight operator, clearly pre-instructed, swung a beam of light onto Clara. She rose gracefully, a goddess in shimmering gold, and gave a small, modest wave to the applauding crowd. It was a declaration, a public anointing of his mistress in front of his wife, his mother, and the entire world that mattered to them. James's arrogance was boundless. He finished his speech to thunderous applause and returned to the table, his eyes shining with triumph. He leaned over and squeezed Amelia's hand. "Your turn, darling," he whispered, his breath smelling of champagne. "Just a few words, keep it simple." Then he spoke into the microphone again. "And now, for a special message from someone whose boundless heart and incredible courage inspires us all, my wonderful wife, Amelia." Amelia stood up. A hush fell over the room as she made her way to the podium. She was a vision of quiet elegance in a simple, dark blue gown, the necklace her only adornment. She looked small on the large stage, and the audience settled in for what they assumed would be a brief, emotional, and ultimately forgettable thank you. She arranged her notes, took a breath, and looked out at the sea of faces. Her voice, when she spoke, was not frail or emotional. It was clear, steady, and resonated with an unexpected authority. "Good evening," she began. "I want to thank you all for being here to support the incredible work of this foundation." She paused, her eyes sweeping the room before they came to rest, with pinpoint accuracy, on James. "This past year has been one of profound learning for me. It has taught me the true meaning of sacrifice. It has taught me about the fragility of life. And, most importantly, it has taught me about the intricate and devastating nature of betrayal." A ripple of confusion went through the ballroom. This was not the speech anyone was expecting. James's confident smile tightened at the edges. Clara's posture stiffened. Amelia continued, her voice never wavering. "My husband spoke so eloquently of a brilliant business partner who is securing the company's future. I felt it was my duty, as a member of this family and a beneficiary of its legacy, to share with all of you, our board members, our investors, our friends, a closer look at the bold strategies being deployed in that partnership." She pressed a small button on the podium. Behind her, the massive screen that had been displaying the Davenport Foundation's elegant logo flickered and changed. A title slide appeared in stark black and white letters. "Argent Tower and Affiliates, an internal financial review." James's face went white. "Amelia, what is this?" he started to say from his seat, but his voice was lost as Amelia began to speak again, her tone now cool and clinical, like a professor delivering a lecture. "For the past 6 months," she began, as the next slide appeared, showing a complex flowchart, "Davenport funds allocated for the Argent Tower project have been systematically diverted through a network of shell corporations, beginning with a consulting firm many of you may now have heard of, Beaumont Holdings." She clicked again. A copy of a fraudulent multi-million-dollar invoice appeared on the screen, an invoice signed by her husband. "These funds," she narrated calmly, "were then rerouted to a series of high-risk, private real estate ventures secretly co-owned by my husband and Mr. Franklin Beaumont." She gestured vaguely in the direction of Clara's horrified father. Gasps rippled through the audience. Board members were leaning forward, their faces grim. The journalists were writing at a furious pace. Amelia was relentless. Of course, a partnership of this magnitude requires a great deal of private collaboration. The screen changed to show a high-resolution photograph of James and Clara kissing on the balcony of a hotel suite in Paris. The date stamp was clearly visible in the corner. Then, she delivered the final, devastating blow. Let's listen in on one of their strategy sessions, shall we? A crystal-clear audio file began to play through the ballroom's state-of-the-art sound system. It was James's voice, laughing with Clara. Honestly, once the old woman signs over the last of the voting shares, we're free. Her gratitude for the new kidney will only last so long. We just need to manage the saint for a few more months. The sound of her husband's voice, so filled with cruel, dismissive greed, echoed in the dead silence of the room. It was an execution. The chaos was instantaneous. The room erupted in a roar of shock and outrage. Phones were held aloft, their cameras like 1,000 unblinking eyes. James leaped to his feet, his face a contorted mask of fury and panic. Lies! These are all lies. She's unstable. The surgery. But no one was listening. Clara looked as if she had been turned to stone, her golden dress suddenly looking cheap and garish. From her seat, Eleanor Davenport watched her son's public immolation without a flicker of emotion. It was the cold, dispassionate gaze of justice being served. Amelia looked down from the podium one last time, her eyes meeting James's. She said nothing more. She didn't need to. She turned and walked calmly off the stage, just as two uniformed police officers began to make their way purposefully toward the head table. Her lawyer, Jessica Ramirez, intercepted James before he could flee, serving him with a thick sheaf of legal papers. Flashbulbs strobed like lightning, capturing his complete and utter ruin for the morning papers. Amelia did not look back. Her work was done. Head held high, the Davenport star blazing like a supernova against her throat, she walked through the pandemonium and out of the ballroom, leaving the smoldering wreckage of her husband's life behind her. The immediate aftermath of the gala was not a slow decline, it was a detonation. The story was a media firestorm, a scandal for the ages that tore through the city's elite like a hurricane. The Davenport name, once a synonym for power and prestige, was now irrevocably linked to fraud, adultery, and public disgrace. James was a pariah. He was captured in 1,000 flashbulbs, his face a mask of pathetic disbelief, as he was escorted from the ballroom. The board of directors, galvanized by Eleanor's loyalists, convened an emergency meeting and summarily fired him. He was hit with a barrage of lawsuits from betrayed investors and a federal investigation into corporate fraud. His assets were frozen. His reputation was incinerated. Clara and the Beaumont family were swept away in the same tide of ruin. Their names were toxic, their businesses exposed as co-conspirators in a massive fraud. They became social lepers, their empire crumbling under the weight of James's hubris and their own greed. In a matter of hours, the two people who had plotted to erase Amelia were themselves erased from the world they held so dear. The mansion, once a stage for drama and tension, fell into a deep, unnerving silence. It was a week after the gala. The staff moved on tiptoe, the phones had stopped ringing, and the house felt like a grand, empty mausoleum. Amelia found Eleanor in the library, the very room where she had been so cruelly dismissed months before. Eleanor sat by the window, not reading, simply staring out at the manicured gardens, looking every bit her age for the first time. She didn't turn as Amelia entered. "I was wrong," Eleanor said, her voice quiet but clear, devoid of its usual imperious tone. "That's a small, useless word for what I was. I was a fool. I let my pride and my prejudice blind me to the truth. I cultivated a monster and tried to destroy a queen." She finally turned, her eyes meeting Amelia's. There was no artifice left, only a weary, profound regret. "He was my son, but he did not have my strength. It seems he married it instead. The kidney you gave me saved my life. But the truth you revealed saved my legacy. I am in your debt twice over." Amelia simply nodded. There was nothing to say. Forgiveness was a complex, distant country she had not yet decided to visit. But in that moment, she felt a flicker of something else, a shared, bitter understanding. They were two women who had been betrayed by the same man, and who had, in the end, worked together to ensure justice was done. Later that day, Eleanor approached her again. This time, she carried a heavy, dust-covered box, bound in brass. "There is one final debt to be paid," she said, her voice heavy. She unlocked the box, and from it, she removed a thick, leather-bound journal and a set of rolled-up schematics, yellowed with age. "The story everyone knows," Eleanor began, "is that my late husband, Richard Davenport, was a genius, that he built this company from nothing on the back of his revolutionary patent for a new type of geothermal regulator." She pushed the journal and the schematics across the polished table to Amelia. "The story is a lie. Richard was brilliant, but he was also an opportunist. He had a partner in the early days, a friend he loved like a brother. The true genius, the man who actually invented the regulator." Amelia unrolled the schematics. On the bottom right corner was a signature, faded but distinct, and a name that made the world tilt on its axis. "His name was David Miller," Eleanor said softly. "Your grandfather." The truth was a final, devastating blow, but it explained everything. The Davenports had built their empire on a lie, their fortune founded upon a theft that had ruined her family generations ago. Her entire life, the lives of her parents and grandparents, had been lived in the shadow of this colossal, hidden injustice. They had not just taken her dignity in marriage, they had taken her family's entire legacy. The kidney, her kidney, now functioning inside Eleanor, was not just an act of strategic grace. It felt like a biological reclaiming of a generational debt, a piece of the Miller family taking back its rightful place inside the heart of the Davenport empire. Amelia did not seek to destroy what was left. Revenge was a barren, empty landscape she sought to restore. With the undeniable proof of her grandfather's work, combined with the leverage from James's crimes, she took controlling interest of the company. She didn't burn the Davenport name from the history books. In a move that shocked the financial world, she restructured and renamed the company. It became the Miller Davenport Corporation, a name that acknowledged both the crime and the reconciliation. She established Eleanor as a non-voting, honorary member of the board, an act of cold, pragmatic grace that acknowledged her final allegiance to the truth. The story ends not in a courtroom, but in a boardroom. Amelia, no longer the saintly victim or the quiet wife, but the chairwoman. She did not seek revenge, she sought justice. And in the quietest corners of a broken heart, sometimes the strongest foundations are built. Never underestimate the silence of a person who has endured for too long. For years, Amelia's silence was a shield, a way to survive the daily onslaught of cruelty. But in the end, when she finally chose to speak, her words did not just fill a room. They leveled an empire and rebuilt it from the ground up, proving that the most powerful voice is often the one that waits for the perfect moment to tell the undeniable truth. Join us next time for another story, where the secrets of the family are always the darkest, and the debts of the past are always paid in full.